we'll do the live thing first. Like. Hey everybody, before we start, if you're new to the podcast or if you've been here before, welcome back. I just wanted to let you know, if you love it, if you like what you hear, go and subscribe, go and like the page, go and like our posts, like our videos, give us a 5-star rating wherever you see us. Also, we did start a Patreon. There's going to be a lot of exclusive stuff on there, behind the scenes stuff. I'm going to be starting something called Bigmark's Book Club, which is going to be super cool, going over some of the books I've seen and much more. I'm really starting it because I want to hear from everybody and I want your opinions, because I'm doing this for you guys. I love talking about all this stuff, but I want to hear from you guys. I want to talk about stuff that you guys want to hear, right? So anyway, subscribe, patreon.com/thebigmarkpod. And check us out. Like I said, like us everywhere. Turn on that notifications. Thanks so much. Let's get right into it. Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. I'm your host, Bigmark. And today, when we're doing these one-on-one things, like I said before, I wanted to kind of get into a little bit more like history stuff, maybe some topics here and there. But again, right, I wanted to do some more specific stuff about sports because, hey, we talk about psychedelics and we talk about sports, but today, actually, I want to talk about the 1992 Lithuanian National Basketball Team. Super cool.
What's that?
So it actually harkens back to this shirt. So like I said before, I'm going to be wearing a different shirt every podcast. If you got shirts, send them in, XX. I'll wear your shirt. But this one's one of my favorites. If you know me, I wear this shirt all the time. But Lithuanian National Basketball Team. So you're probably wondering why on earth is the Lithuanian Basketball National Team shirt a skeleton cramming the basket into the hoop, and like what is even happening? There's skulls, like what is even going on? So I'll get to that point. We're gonna kind of Tarantino things a little bit today, and I'm gonna give you guys just a little taste. So a little bit about Lithuania first. Actually, so it's a little tiny country in northern Europe, just north of Poland. They do share a border. To the east of Lithuania is Russia. To the west is the Baltic Sea. Above Lithuania is Latvia and Estonia. Those are also considered the Baltic states. I myself am Lithuanian. My mom side, complete Lithuanian. My grandpa's from there. My grandma's from a small city in Lithuania. Both those places may or may not exist post-war, because both my grandparents did leave, during World War II, because essentially, during World War II, Lithuania was annexed by the USSR, by the Soviet Union. So there was a lot of deportations. There was a lot of people leaving at that time. But anyway, Lithuania is about 3 million people, so it's not a huge country, really small. But they've always loved their basketball. They've been really big in basketball, and that's kind of started since 1939. They hosted and won the European Basketball Championship, which kind of sparked their big love of basketball. And more or less right after that, they were annexed by the USSR. And I mean, historically, the USSR obviously didn't treat any of the annexed countries and their own country very well. There's not enough time in this podcast to go into all the different things that the Soviet Union were doing, but it was obviously very oppressed. Lithuanians never ever wanted to be a part of Russia. Obviously, they were their own separate country. They did their own thing, and to be oppressed by the Soviet Union was brutal. So it was really their love of basketball that kind of got them through it, because once the USSR took over Lithuania, that's when they started sending people to the prison camps, sending them to Siberia, sending them to the Gulag, basically for almost nothing. Like, you could have a night, like, so my family, my grandfather's brother, so my great uncle, or my grand uncle, I guess I should say, he committed suicide because he knew he was going to be sent to one of these prison camps, because his neighbor, he was a farmer, his neighbor had just been sent to Siberia for having a nicer farm than the next guy. That was it. There was no, like, guys got sent away because they had too much land. It was basically, there was no reason, there was no rhyme or reason to how any of this stuff worked. And it was just brutal. It was so tense, so horrible. And again, obviously having all these people leave added to it. But the people that stayed behind were horribly oppressed, just treated poorly anyway. And, you know, my grandmother left. You know, she escaped through Nazi-occupied Germany to get out of Lithuania and came over on a boat. You know, she was hiding in people's cupboards. She was hiding in a hay truck that got stopped at a checkpoint, and they checked with like pitchforks to see if anyone was under there, and they didn't catch my grandmother. And she had my oldest aunt, who was like 2 years old, little kid at the time, she was carrying her around. And that was, again, brutal time. My grandfather was in a prison camp. It was a German-run prison camp, because I don't think he was actually involved, like, because the Lithuanian army was kind of splintered, he was probably just captured as a civilian, but a Nazi guard lifted up the fence and let my grandfather and a bunch of guys leave. So if it wasn't for that dude, like, it would, I wouldn't be here, you know, none of my life would exist. But anyway, so it's, it's tough to talk about, and it's pretty heavy duty. But, you know, that's what I said, like, my family dealing with that has always brought me closer to their experiences. But, again, I've always felt the plight, you know, and Lithuanians too. It's very prideful. They're really, you know, they love the country, and all the people who've left the country are really, they love Lithuania. They're all about that. And, you know, that's all I can really say about that. I'll probably go into it in another podcast, but, you know, it was pretty intense. So anyway, Lithuania labored through, you know, the 50s, 60s, 70s, all under USSR occupation, dealing with all the bread lines, dealing with having to wait in line to get meat. Sometimes there wasn't meat. Sometimes it was hard to get bread. You know, I just want to say labas to all my Lithuanian family out there. You know, it was just Lithuanian Independence Day last week. So that's what kind of sparked this whole conversation. And, you know, it's been huge, and it's been really big part of my life. And, you know, I just wanted to tell this story because it's super cool. Anyway, so through the 70s, Lithuania still continued to play basketball because it was part of their history. There was a Soviet basketball league that they were a part of. And you know, they would play the Russians, but again, Lithuania was still part of the USSR. So again, it was always this nationalist pride. Lithuanians always consider themselves Lithuanians. And, again, it was always so hard for them to have to deal with all this Russian stuff. Like, again, if they wanted to get a car, there was like a 10-year waiting list essentially to get a car. Like, you'd save and save, you basically couldn't eat. And then you would have to put in all this money to get this car, and then have to wait years and years to get it, just because, again, that's just how the whole Soviet machine worked. And it was just tough to deal with. But again, they always had basketball, and it was something that they took pride in. And unfortunately, obviously, because Lithuania was part of the USSR, when they played internationally, they had, like, any basketball players had to play for Russia. They had to play as the USSR. So, 1988 Seoul Olympics come around, and this is like before. In 1988, it's most likely known that was when Ben Johnson and Carl Lewis had their big match, and Ben Johnson tested positive for all those steroids and all those performance enhancers. That's basically what Seoul is known for. But at the time, it was the height of the Cold War, and the USSR and America were in the final for basketball. And obviously everyone's watching because it's the Russians versus the Americans, you know, just like the Cold War. And this was before pros could play in the Olympics. So at that point, there was rules to say that if you were a professional athlete, because the Olympics are about amateur athletes, if you were a professional, that you weren't allowed to actually compete in the games in your sport, I guess. So none of the NBA players that would have been playing in the NBA at the time. So again, it was mostly NCAA. It would have been all NCAA guys that were like 1 year away from being in the NBA anyway. These were the guys, and like some older guys usually too, I'm sure. But these were like, that was the national team. Anyway, at least in the States. And they're playing the USSR, and the USSR ends up beating them. So it's a huge deal. Russia beats America in basketball, and that's obviously, basketball is so important to Americans. And again, they're so upset about losing to Russians, but 4 out of 5 of the starting five for Russia were actually Lithuanians. They were actually nationally Lithuanians. They always, and they hated when people would interview them and say, hey, look, what's it like being a Russian in America? What's it like doing this? What's it like doing that? And they said, I'm not Russian, I'm Lithuanian. So there was probably 4 guys that I could really mention from that national team. Those were the 4 starting guys: Sarunis Barcelona, Rimas Kurtinaitis, Arvida Sabonis, and Valdemaras Holmichas. So all those guys were huge, right? Like they were gonna be, they were like the big stars anyway, again, forced to play for another team. So you could imagine not wanting to play, but that's the only way. You're in the prime of your career, and that's all you can really do, right? Is you have, the only way you can play is play for the enemy, unfortunately. So anyway, that was a huge thing happen. And the late 80s, things were kind of moving, things were changing, lots of different changes were happening in the world. If we back it up a little bit, in 1986, Chernobyl went down. So, if anyone watched that awesome bio series on HBO about Chernobyl, really cool series, but just absolutely horrible events that went down because of at the time, very standard practice in the USSR. A lot of double talk, a lot of double speak, a lot of double think, a lot of stuff where they're saying one thing, but they know something else is true. They understand that there's something else going on, but what we're saying is what goes, because we're the dictatorship and we are the Soviet Union. So all that stuff was kind of going on, and basically Mikhail Gorbachev, who was the Soviet Union, was the leader of the Soviet Union at the time of after Chernobyl. He was basically said that was probably one of the biggest blows to the Soviet Union, that eventually it did die because of what happened in Chernobyl, because it exposed so many lies. And that was the biggest, or at least one of the largest cracks in the crust, if you will, of the Soviet Union at the time. And then in 1989, a couple years later, the Berlin Wall falls, Tiananmen Square is happening, and obviously Berlin, East and West Germany were split. East Germany was communist, West Germany was democratic, and there was a wall. If anyone doesn't know what the Berlin Wall is, there was a wall that divided Berlin from East and West Germany. Anyway, that fell in 89. Tiananmen Square, which was a big protest against the Chinese government at the time. Guys standing in front of a tank. I'm sure everyone's kind of seen that happen before. And it's funny because during the revolutions, when the Soviet Union was falling and Lithuania was trying to get its independence from Russia, there was times where guys were standing in front of tanks, and it was super eerie. I've seen images where it's really, really interesting. If you want to look that up online, it's super interesting to see the similarities between Tiananmen Square and what happened in Lithuania in 91 when things did change. So again, that's a little bit in the future, right? So 86, 87, around that time, Žalgiris, which is one of the main professional basketball teams in Lithuania. Žalgiris is actually the old Knights of Lithuania. So there's a lot of history that goes back into that with Lithuanians. Vytautas is on the crest. He's a guy riding a horse. Horse name's Mindaugas, if anyone want to know. But that's big in Lithuanian pride that the knights and stuff, they really held up. And Lithuania, actually at the time, during the Roman Empire, they were one of the last empires to stop the Roman Empire's climb north. So basically, once the Romans hit Lithuania, they stopped because of the resistance from those knights and the people who were battling from those descendants. So that's all. That pride is just all reinforced when they're playing this CSKA Moscow, which is the team from Moscow, from Russia. Big deal, same league, obviously giant rivals. And during all this, it's a smaller version of the Cold War, but again, such huge tensions between these two teams, and they're both playing each other. And anytime Žalgiris would play CSKA Moscow, the streets would be empty. Everyone's in there supporting and watching, because again, it was a big part of Lithuanian pride, was basketball. So during these years after '89, in Russia and stuff, there was something called glasnost and petroika. So basically, glasnost is openness and transparency, and that was what the Russian government kind of came out and said, hey, look, it's all about this. It's all about openness and transparency. We're no longer hiding all these things in the back. Meanwhile, I'm sure they were doing all kinds of stuff on the down low. And then this petroika was a political movement. So both those things happening really, really led to the end of the Soviet Union, which was in 1991. And the Soviet Union didn't really go out super quiet, especially in Lithuania. So as this was happening, as the Soviet Union was falling, Lithuania was like, we're going to declare independence because we want to be our own nation. Soviet Union's falling, and Soviet Union was like, no chance, you're still part of this until we're done. And they went in there with tanks, and like I said, that's when you had people standing up to these tanks, just like Tiananmen Square. People, and it was more or less people all just gathered in Vilnius and in Kaunas, which are the big cities in Lithuania, and just kind of stood up to the Russians. And again, it was the Russians were on their way out, but at the same time, they still rolled in there, and they weren't going to go out without a fight. So unfortunately, this is like in January of '91. Lots of people were unfortunately killed, run over by tanks, all kinds of horrific stuff. But February 15th, 1991, Lithuania gained their independence. And again, like I said, February is a huge month, obviously Black History Month. But again, for Lithuania, it was huge for them to gain that independence and allow people to then leave. Like, shout out Jonas Valanciunas, former Raptor. Raptors used to shout him out, give him a Lithuanian Pride Day. I always wish I went to one of those games. But again, since then, Jonas Valanciunas was born in 1992, so he never really saw Lithuania not free. So it's amazing to think that there's still so many people that are alive today that lived in a time in Lithuania where things were just brutal. But anyway, we'll get back to the team a little bit. So two guys from that starting four, super big stars from the team and in Lithuania, but they actually did go on to play in the NBA. So one of the best guys on the team, Arvida Sabonis, 7'4". Basically, he was considered to be like the 7'4" Larry Bird. He was amazing, had great court vision. He was a great passer. Obviously, being 7'4", he was pretty dominant finisher. And he was a really good teenage athlete, and then just kind of made his way up in the ranks, so to speak. And so he actually did get drafted in 1986, but I think Portland drafted him. But anyway, they were trying to get him over, but the USSR wouldn't let him leave, because that's just what they did. The USSR would grant you access to either leave or you're not going to go. More or less, no one left except this one dude named Garry Kasparov. He was like a chess champion, and he proved himself as this chess champion, and he was the one that he could actually leave Russia at will. And at the time, he was really one of the only people who could actually do that. So unfortunately, Arvida Sabonis was not able to go to the NBA at that time, and he knew that too. He knew, what's going to happen. I'm just going to be, a team is buying me. I'm not going to be able to leave anyway. I'm just going to stay here and play basketball. So again, one of the best players to potentially ever play, and he's just, squandered because his country's ideals don't let him leave. So super bummer. His son is actually in the NBA right now, Damonte Sabonis. He plays for the Pacers right now. But he was born in Portland, actually, because of, Arvidas actually did end up getting drafted by Portland when he was 31, though. So he was a 31-year-old rookie and played a couple years. He was actually one of the only guys to, effectively go up against Shaq. He was strong and he was offensively minded that, he actually put Shaq to work. But again, not the longest career, kind of started late, which is unfortunate. But that brings us to Sarunis Barcelona, which is actually a little bit more of a happy story because in 1987, only a year later, he ended up playing in this tournament, and he ended up playing in a tournament with Donnie Nelson, who's actually Don Nelson's son. Don Nelson, super famous basketball coach, and anyway, his son was playing in this tournament and got to know Sarunis, and Sarunis is like, hey, or by the time Donnie goes back and he's talking to his dad, they're like, hey, we should go recruit this two guard from Lithuania. He's super strong, and he was talking about Sarunis, and so anyway, Donnie Marshall, funny, those are my some former teammates, but anyway, Don and Donnie Nelson end up going back to Lithuania, and they're recruiting Sarunis, but obviously he's going to run into the same problem that Arvida Sabonis ran into, is that the USSR is the one that's going to be calling the shots. So you're either leaving, or you and your family might be sent to Siberia. That's straight up fact. That's what they were dealing with. And Kasparov was the one who was telling him that, because he was like, listen, sometimes the USSR might grant you because they know that you're going to go out there and you're going to give the USSR a good name because you're going to produce out there, you're going to be a good player. But sometimes they were like, listen, you're not going anywhere because that's how we run the show. And because you wanted to go out there, that means you have some kind of capitalist ideals, and who knows who you're talking to, all this stuff. Like, he couldn't even walk around the street when Don and Donnie would come, because just walking around the street was enough to be like, you're associating with Westerners, which means they're probably rich. Why, again, it was that easy for people to start, and it was about snitching on other people. Like, my grandmother would always be like looking out the window. It was just like out of habit, because it was all about, just like, what is the other person doing, and do you have to tell them before they get you? It was like, I'm going to tell on someone, not only hopefully that if you like them, they're not going to get caught, because you're going to be like, yo, stop what you're doing. Or you're going to be like, I'm going to tell the authorities so that they get sent to Siberia and I don't. It just got cutthroat. It's brutal. It's sad. It's awful. But that's how sad it was at the time. Anyway, so Barcelonis is sitting in there, and there was 5 representatives from the NBA and 20 people from Lithuania and the Soviet Union, essentially trying to be like, all right, what are we going to get from this situation? And Sarunis is sitting in there, and he's scared out of his mind. Obviously, he doesn't know what's going to happen to him and his family. Obviously, it's happy ending. Thankfully, they give him the time of day, and they let him leave, and he gets to go. He gets to go play, and he gets to go play for Golden State. Actually, he does really well for them. And obviously, while this is happening, Barcelonis is telling everyone on the team, and he was playing with Chris Mullin at the time, and obviously Don and Donnie Nelson were close with him, but he's telling them, like, listen, this is what's happening in back in my country, and this is 87, 88, 89, things are happening, and finally come 91, Lithuania gains their independence, but then all of a sudden they're just completely left with nothing. They were left with bankrupt, essentially, as a country. USSR was like, we're taking everything we got. So we got Sarunis Barcelona, we got Arvida Sabonis, we got all these amazing players in Lithuania, but we just can't. They just couldn't get a national team together. They had no money. They had nothing, right? So anyway, obviously, since Golden State is in the Bay Area, there's like lots of writers doing stories on the team, and one writer does a story on what's happening in Lithuania. They finally gain their independence, but they have no money. They can't do their thing. They can't even compete because they don't have any money to start their team, to get all the travel fees, to do all the different stuff, uniforms, all that craziness. Anyway, so this article goes on, right? And this guy writes about, hey, Lithuania's in trouble. You know, they're like, they got no money, and the Grateful Dead ends up reading this article because it's in the Bay Area, right? And obviously Lithuania is, obviously the Bay Area, Golden State Warriors, everyone's interested. So anyway, so this article comes out, and Grateful Dead catches wind of it, and they're like, they come and they start talking to Sarunis, and they start talking to Nelson, and they're like, hey, how can we support the team? We love you guys. We're about freedom and celebration. You know, what happened in Lithuania was super inspiring, and it was like, hey, you know, this is super cool. We want to support you. So Grateful Dead basically sends them this big, huge check and supports them, sends them a bunch of tees, a bunch of tie-dye tees, and is like, hey, this is super cool. Like, we're here to support you. So as soon as Lithuania gets all these shirts, and this is the exact shirt that they got, and the designer basically was thinking, hey, you know, it's Lithuania coming out of the ashes and jamming it. You know, they're achieving something that they were put down for so long, and it was like, this is having this tie-dye separated them, and they just felt like finally they're their own country. And yeah, it was new, and it was so different from anything that they were ever able to do before in that time. But you know, it felt, and they wore them everywhere. They wore them to press conferences, and they were just super proud of it. So you know, it really, you know, obviously the Grateful Dead, Jerry Garcia, Bob Weir, Phil Lesh, Bill Kreutzmann, Mickey Hart, all those boys are down. They're the tie-dye boys. They're the hippie boys. But again, they're down for that freedom and for that idea that Lithuania represented, that, hey, you know, you might be down, but you're not out. You can still, if you have that glimmer of hope, whatever that is, even if it's a sport, just hold on to that, and then keep going at it, keep growing that light, and eventually it's just going to spread, right? So with that money, Lithuania starts going to qualifiers, right? They start playing all these teams. They're getting ready to go, because 1992 Barcelona Olympics are coming up. So they end up qualifying for the Summer Games, which is awesome. The cool thing about the 92 Summer Games, because all this stuff was happening, because of the Soviet Union crashing, because of all this stuff, you had a bunch of new teams. So you had like unified Germany. Obviously, there's no more USSR. So they were represented by they were called the unified teams. So that still exists, right? That still exists in the Olympics. And they essentially are like teams that aren't represented by a country or don't want to be, or something happened, like they got boycotted or whatever. Anyway, South Africa was like their own sovereign nation for like the first time too. No more apartheid. Super cool. And all these people were part of these 92 games, and it was in Barcelona. Everyone's having a good time. It's Spain, having fun. And it's funny, all the Lithuanians, right, because they're all businessmen, they're always trying to make a little money. They would buy all this stuff and you know, get wherever they went, they would come back and sell it for like triple the price, and guys would fill up their, you know, go with like 2 t-shirts so they could fill up their whole case with like blue jeans and like take it home. It was so funny, but that's just how number one, how much the USSR had separated itself from like the entire world at the time, and 2, how little Lithuania was even left with, right? Because they were just loving it. So anyway, Another big thing about the 92 summer games was that the Dream Team was there. So everyone knows about the Dream Team American basketball team. But if you don't know about it, essentially it was like one of the greatest teams ever composed. It was essentially like an all-star team of like the early 90s, late 80s basketball. Like it was Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Charles Barkley, Karl Malone, John Stockton, Patrick Ewing, David Robinson, Clyde the Glide Drexler, Scottie Pippen, Chris Mullin, and Christian Laettner. Christian Laettner was the only guy on the team that was still in university at the time, and he went to Duke. Yeah, baby, let's go. So he won a national title and a gold medal in the same year. I don't know if he went on to win an NBA championship. I should have looked that up, but hey, what can you do? Anyway, these guys were obviously absolutely stacked. Even just Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird alone could have destroyed anybody. But they were straight up beating teams like by 40, by 60. Like they would just crumble teams. So anyway, they're ripping through their side of the pool, right? Like destroying everyone. I think Canada maybe played. I don't even know if Canada. I think Canada played them in a qualifier and got absolutely crumbled. But anyway, there was the other Dream Team, though, which was not only the title of a wicked documentary that everyone should check out. Super cool. It's all about what I'm talking about today, but goes into a little bit more detail. And super cool. You get to listen to some of the players talk about it, and it's just a really well done documentary. But the Lithuanian team, you know, they had their work cut out for them, but they beat China, Venezuela, Puerto Rico, and Brazil to get to the semis to play the U.S. So anyway, they had to play the Dream Team, and for them it was amazing. You know, one of the guys started taking pictures from the sideline, like one of the actual players. Like they were just having fun. Like they got beat by 40, but they're having a good time. So they didn't really mind. They still wanted to get to that bronze game though, right? So they ended up going to the bronze game and they play the unified team. So the unified team is basically old USSR, new Russia. Essentially, now we have the matchup that every Lithuanian in the world is friggin' wanting to see, is Lithuania basically versus the USSR. So I'm talking every Lithuanian in the entire country was watching. I'm talking every Lithuanian in Chicago and in Toronto and in Hamilton and in Canada and in everywhere around the world. In Australia, I think there's a bunch of Lugans. Love all you guys. But again, every one of those people were glued to that TV, I'm sure, watching, because again, this was them proving themselves as a nation, right? So they're playing the unified team, super close, the whole game. They're trading the lead, and then finally Lithuania wins. So they won that bronze, and that bronze was as good as gold for that national team. And you know, it's a really special thing. Again, it's inspiring to think, hey, this super small nation could do so much. And again, yeah, they won third place, but when they stepped on that podium, they, in their tie-dye, they were just as stoked. They felt like they had conquered the world, I'm sure, right? And again, from then on, no one ever called them Russians again. Everyone knew them as Lithuanians, and so important for the nation. And yeah, the nation's known for playing basketball and being power lifters, but it's a beautiful country. And I hope someday to get out there. But again, shout out to all my Lithuanian people. Labas, kaip einasi. Love all you guys. And again, you know, if you like what you hear and you want to hear more, subscribe to the Patreon. There's a bunch of different tiers for you to choose from. And again, like us, support us, give us that 5-star rating, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.